Good afternoon, everyone. Tim Goff here, CEO, founder of My Ground Force. Do you do everything software for your line haul business and soon for your P&D business? As you know, we've been hosting a series of webinars/podcasts on Tuesday afternoons now for quite some time. And here in the fall of 2024, we focused on the most important part of being a line haul contractor, which is how to do it profitably. We spent some time studying the contract and helping you understand more deeply your risk and what the requirements are to be compliant in the new, what we call now the CSPA, the Contractor Service Provider Agreement. They change it all the time. And then we obviously heard from a Wall Street analyst. That was a great conversation. And then we spent some time with experts in certain fields to help you to learn how to leverage certain aspects, required aspects of your business in a way that you can operate more profitably. We spent some conversation time with Motive, and we discussed the machine vision plus artificial intelligence requirements and how you can leverage that to help yourself operate more profitably. We studied tires. We went to the basic elements of tires and understood exactly from the ground up, shall we say, how tires are made, how they're built, how to buy tires, how to operate your business. We did that with the tire experts, Southern Tire Mart. And then last week, we spent some time studying how to maintain your tires with PSI International. And we specifically talked about the TireView Live solution. Many of you have purchased that over the past week. We appreciate that. And why did we do that? Tires are your fourth greatest expense in your entire business. So we've spent 2 full podcast hours talking about tires to help you get the information and the knowledge that you need, not from Facebook, but from people who know, experts in the field. Well, today we're going to bring another expert to the table, Norb Kohler. Norb Kohler is a TSP like you are, or I guess we're calling us CSPs now. But Norb does so much more. He has so many skill sets, it's hard to track them all. He's been on podcasts and other places talking about the huge spot operation he runs in Southern California. But he also does some broker work on occasion. And the thing I love about Norb, and anybody that knows him for sure knows this, is he's as honest a man as you will ever meet. And so, man, that's a refreshing aspect for to have in your broker, right? So I felt since it's really important for us to understand how to grow our businesses, and the only way to do that right now primarily is through acquisition, then, and for those folks who want to get into the line haul business, we should talk about entry strategies. And Norb has put together an amazing presentation that we're going to go through, a lot of really great information. And I'm going to turn this floor over to him shortly. We did put out a poll question while we were waiting for everyone. 75% of folks on this webinar are interested in growing their business through acquisition. And so this will be extremely timely information for you. Now, the opposite of entering the business is getting out of the business. As you know, I left the business in 2023 so that I could grow my relationship with you guys and with FedEx on the software side. And what we're going to talk about next week is how to exit the business, what the right way to do that is, and to do it tax-free. I think everybody would like to exit this business tax-free. I certainly did. So next week, we're going to talk about that. So this week, we're going to come into the business and do it the right way. This is what you hear me say all the time. To be profitable in this business, you have to do it the right way. There's 1,700 contractors. There are not 1,700 ways to be successful in this business. So what we do is bring you the experts that teach you the 1 or 2 ways to be successful in this business. And next week, we're going to talk to you about how to get out of the business if you decide to sell, you reach your financial targets, and how to do that tax-free. So again, today we're going to have Norb Kohler. I'm going to turn the floor over to Norb, and we'll be sending poll questions out to you along the way. I'm really excited to have Norb today. Norb, thanks for giving us your time, and I'll turn the floor over to you, and we'll go to the first slide, Allie. Norb, you have the floor, sir.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate the invitation. Just maybe a couple disclosure items to begin with. I don't consider myself an expert, so I appreciate that that statement, Tim. But I consider myself a learner. So what we're going to talk about today is the process of learning, and I've been on, I would say, 90% of your webinar series, and learned so much through all the stuff that you present. Tim, you and I have talked about that before. So I view this webinar today as a learning process. You're going to learn some things. Some of the things you've already heard. Other things are going to make you think. And probably the most important thing that I'd like to share today is the idea that we become more familiar with the purchase and sales process and what that looks like. So let me give you just a little background of how I got to this space. So first of all, next week, Tim's guest is going to be a man by the name of Kevin Brunner. Kevin and I have been doing business for over 5 years together. We started in the real estate space, where he saved a bunch of my clients a bunch of money with no tax on the way out. Next week is a must. You got to be here because it's a crucial part of how you exit in the FedEx space, particularly for contractors that have grown over the years. And there's a lot of equity in the business, and you're going to have a tax bill the size of Montana. So the idea is to obviously pay no tax. So make sure you're on this next week. How I got into the space was by Kevin, actually. He got me involved as a broker and selling FedEx contracts and brokering deals. And after I looked at a couple line haul opportunities, a partner and I jumped in. And so in Southern California, we're in the line haul space. We do about $3.5 million in revenue, and it's a combination of a bunch of different things. And as Tim said, we're heavy on spots. I'm pretty bullish on spots, which most of you in this space know that that's a contentious issue as well now that FedEx has put a halt on selling and purchasing spots. So we'll see what happens in that specific space in the future. So
Norb, if I could jump in here, I want to say two things.
Yeah.
First of all, Norb is too kind. He absolutely does know what he's doing in this space, and you can absolutely trust him. And as part of this webinar today, he and I are going to team together, and we're going to give some lucky winner a business valuation, either something you want to buy or maybe own your own business as our giveaway today, and in appreciation of you coming aboard. We're gonna do that giveaway. The other thing is if you do have only spots and you want to sell, you would have to do it through a stock sale. If you just do an asset sale, FedEx has the option to move those spots elsewhere. They always have that option, but as Norb said, selling a spot only business is challenging and pretty much limited to a stock purchase. In fact, I don't even think you have to tell FedEx anything about a stock purchase. You can do it, or stock sale, I should say. You just have to change the AO potentially. So you have to be very crafty, and you're going to learn some of that today. So thanks for letting me interrupt, Norb.
Yeah, no problem. And you're right, Tim. There are some options in that. Ironically, in the last 6 to 8 months, I've had FedEx shut down several deals that were carve-outs, right? That had either teams or PM solo runs, day runs, and spots, and then they wouldn't let them sell. So we did the carve-out. We'll talk about the carve-out a little bit later, but there are options for that. I've talked to several contractors, and we've created some great options how to make that work. Okay, so let me talk to you about, I want to approach this as, the typical buyer, because I deal with hundreds of buyers. I always tell sellers, buyers aren't the problem. If you put your business for sale, the buyer's not the problem. So many people pony up and want to buy FedEx routes. The problem with the buyer, and why it's so important that guys like me do the job well, is that buyers come from all sorts of walks of life. And so the first question I always ask is, what kind of research have you done, right? So I guess the worst case scenario I've ever faced was a guy that argued with me until I was blue in the face. He ignored that I was a contractor. And what I realized, he'd watched one too many YouTube videos, and his version of what a deep dive looked like wasn't near what he needed to do. So I'm always asking buyers, what kind of research have you done? And if I find a buyer that's a good candidate, I'll spend over an hour with them on the phone, because most of the time, the good buyers that pony up and are willing to have a good conversation with me, they don't end up buying the listing that they called about, because it takes, usually that's gone by the time they're ready. So I want to do a really deep dive. And part of that is, how much research have you done? So obviously, if you're a contractor, an existing contractor, and you're looking adding to your portfolio, that question has less impact. It would have more to do with how much research have you done in terms of how FedEx contracts are selling, what's the multiple, what's the percent of revenue, how do you approach that? And so we'll talk about some of that today. But there are obvious resources, and I'm listing a couple of them. They're not exclusive to that. I work for a company called Ground Consult. We do a bunch of information giveaways, and you can find a lot of information on our website. Root Consult is another, KR Capital is another. There are some very good brokers out there, and not to bag on anybody, but there are brokers that are not that good. I remember the first time when I started investigating about buying, I sent out notices to a couple brokers, and what I got back was near what I wanted, right? So I'm not an expert when I'm looking at it, and somebody sends me 52 settlement statements. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what the deep dive looks like on that. So the research part of it is super crucial and critical. So that's an obvious in terms of, if you're on the selling side, who are you utilizing as your sales source, as your broker source, who has the equipment or has the wherewithal to take the time, spend the time to make sure that you're helping those buyers to investigate what needs to be done. Now, for me personally,
if I might jump in there,
absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt. So I help a lot of people come on board the FedEx world, and what you're talking about here is exactly right. I usually spend 5 to 10 hours just teaching them the business and going through how to value a business. And, I give businesses stars, and I have 5 key risk areas that we look at. But one of the things we offer, and Nor's going to talk about this a little bit later, but since he mentioned and somebody sends you 52 settlement statements, we have an acquisition analysis tool at My Ground Force. So we can actually take those 52 settlements and upload them in My Ground Force and give you a full in-depth analysis of that business. So if you decide you want to acquire something, then we've built an analytical tool, and we're constantly expanding its capabilities that will help you manage the preponderance of information you get overwhelmed with when you start doing the proper research on this business. So I'm sorry to interrupt there, Norb. I just wanted to point that out. It's a pretty new product, so I wanted to let people know about it.
Well, 100%. And so, Tim, just piggybacking off of that, most of the time in our analysis, we do a deep dive crunch, and we used to do this manually, deep dive crunch on, hey, the last 3 years of settlements, put them on one document so that you can juxtapose the growth and see what's going on in the business. A brand new buyer that's not a current contractor has no business rifling through 52 settlement statements. They don't know what to look for. And even if you're sharp, to see it on one page is an important thing. However, and I would say this to every contractor that's on this, my company, we're a Ground Force subscriber. And I would say, if you have any inkling of selling your company in the future, you should sign up immediately, because my job as a sales agent or a broker is to disclose to a potential buyer every single nitty detail that I can produce on this company. And the best way to do it is through a resource like this, where I can point to not only past items, but you start setting a trajectory on. Now you're able to see all the data points, because the data points is the crucial part of looking into a company. It's not just the P&L. It's like, how does this thing operate? What's the fuel cost? What's the fuel consumption? How does that relate to different tractors that you have? Tim saved me a boatload of money the first time we really got going, because I realized that in my scenario with some of my PM runs, they're not always able to tank up or fuel up at a FedEx location. And I was kind of had a very laissez-faire attitude about that. Yeah, go fuel up somewhere else. And I knew it was costing me more. I didn't know how much it was costing me more until Tim pointed out that at times I was negative, like about $5,000 a month on fuel that I was just giving away. And I told my guys, guess what? Now you're filling up at FedEx. You're not filling up down the road, right? Because I was saving myself money. I had no idea what those costs were to that degree. And so this is a crucial component if you're looking at selling, to make sure you get on board and let the data drive the information about what your business is doing. Okay. Now, again, just from a typical buyer perspective, one of the things I ask them, is this an investment or is this a job, right? Like, are you looking to take over a small line haul contract and, you know, this is a job you're going to drive and you got a job and you're going to look for some money, or is it an investment opportunity? Here's one thing I've seen in the last 3 to 5 years that's definitely been a change. The kind of buyers that are coming to the table that are not currently contractors is astounding. I mean, we're talking some financial professionals, people in the kind of the workforce world that have run huge companies that are now looking to get into the FedEx space, and they're extremely savvy. They want to look at the data points. They want to look at the financials and do deep dives into what that looks like. It's also very positive, even from just a FedEx perspective. And sometimes I wonder whether they know what kind of buyers are lining up to purchase these contracts. And it makes me feel good, even as a contractor, to realize that the people that want to get into this space have a high degree of confidence, let's say, in, I'll use terms broadly, trucking, e-commerce, American trucking, that type of thing. So they're obviously pretty bullish on that. So that's a good thing. So I look at why people are investing, why they want to purchase, and then we deal with the myth of absentee ownership, right? So people ask, can I buy this and then move to Hawaii and check in once in a while? To which all of us, you're a contractor, you know that regardless of what size of contract you're dealing with or what type of annual revenue you do, if you want to grow your business, you got to pay attention to it, right? So there's this whole idea that you can just disappear and run it and be completely absentee is a bunch of nonsense, unless you buy something that's extremely static and pay a lot of money for a management team to run it. Then you're going to have less of that impact. But that leads me to this idea that there's two ways that people essentially buy, right? And I think most of us on this webinar understand that there's the obvious cash deal and there's the SBA loan option. So I would say two things out of that from my own experience. One, cash is not king anymore. Cash works in that it can bring you to the table quicker. And as a sales opportunity, it can get you the deal done quicker. But very, very few buyers are willing to pony up cash and just say, here's the money for your line haul business, right? So closely related to that is obviously the size of the business. The larger you get, the more complicated it is, the more there's a lack of cash infusion. You get to an SBA scenario until you get over, say, 8 to 10 million. Now there's non-traditional SBA financing that comes into that. But there's this sort of like this sliver between, if you're selling something less than $1 million revenue, say you got a couple, 3, 4 trucks that you're selling, and you're at $800 to $1 million revenue, then there's a cash deal opportunity there. Most buyers want you to carry back, right? So the first thing that I get asked is, what will the seller carry back, right? So most of the time I tell them, sellers don't wake up one morning going, I want to sell my contract and I think I'm going to go into banking. And so I'm going to carry a bunch of money back, So this is where my job, I think I really default to an owner operator as well, where I envision selling my own business. And when I'm doing somebody else's business and selling, I'm like, get out of here. You're not going to make me carry back all this money. I don't want to go into banking. I'm looking to get out and I want my money. So in scenarios where there's carrybacks, it has to be lucrative enough for somebody to consider that and be short enough where there's a bandwidth by how you know you're getting out. So the typical scenario, in fact, I'm sending in an LOI this morning to a contractor that's selling where they're putting down 60% of the money. They'll carry back the rest for 2 years, actually about 2.5 years, and then a balloon payment. So if a contractor buys or an outside person buys and you have 2 years tax returns under your belt, then you can refinance through SBA. Now you've got your own tax returns. As a result, you can refinance and balloon payment that person out. So the cash deal's is doable, but you got to have the parameters that make both people happy.
So Norb, a quick question.
Yeah.
You talked about some owner financing structures there, and there's obviously several different ones, and it's very popular to have this this concept of a balloon payment after, say, 3 years at 8% or 10% or whatever, and they might have a, make a payment for 3 years, but amortize over 10 so that they have a lower payment during to improve their cash flow. But I've helped some folks, and some sellers they see the concept of having a big balloon payment after 36 months as quite a risk, because you might have you might be selling for $2.5 million and end up holding a balloon payment for $700,000-800,000 for 3 years, and if that contractor has a problem, how do you hedge? How do you manage the risk on this balloon payment? What sort of strategies do you work with on your customers or your clients to hedge the risk associated with a large balloon payment like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. So the first thing I would say to that is the most common mistake that I see, and I'm helping 2 contractors now that just are in my we operate out of 3 terminals, and I always bump into guys that come to me and go, so-and-so, I sold this contract and now he won't pay me. He owes me for the trucks, or he owes me a couple $100,000. I said, well, who created the contract? Well, we just had a copy and we kind of threw it together. So basically you did a handshake. I go, well, when you do a handshake, you have no leverage to execute when somebody is failing on paying the money back. So the most important thing is using a lawyer, and there's a couple people that we use that all they do is write FedEx contract and litigate FedEx issues. I mean, this is the guy's entire business. And so those are the kind of contracts that are as bulletproof as you can get to make sure that there are liens on tractors, liens on personal property, and that there's an option by which you have a way to engage that party who is not paying, right? So this is a very, very important part of how you secure yourself. So it has to be done through a legitimate lawyer that'll help you write that out. And then there's obvious things like, liens on tractors, which again is one of those things that you dance with, right? Like, do you want to, if the party fails, do you want to own 5 tractors? I don't. So you got to figure out the balance between, personal liens, leaning their property or whatever, to make sure that you secure that. Now, next week, you're going to talk to Kevin Brunner. There's an option through Kevin to which you can secure this. And there's a way that he'll talk about that next week. That's brilliant. So, Tim, remember to ask Kevin about that next week, and how trusts can carry back. And basically, you're securing your own money to a seller. So anyways, more about that next week.
That is really good counsel. I will definitely ask Kevin about that next week. And if I forget, please hit me in the Q&A next week. And so we hit up your buddy Kevin with that. But I can tell you the kind of counsel that I have. I share with folks that, look, you have to, if you're doing owner financing of any sort, but in particular, if you have a huge payment, a balloon payment that's due in 3 years, and on a 10-year amortization, that number is not going down very much, right? So it's whatever you write for the balloon payment is going to be there. So first of all, Norb's counsel to have a definite contract. You have to do this, people. Don't write a contract, in Law Depot and think you've got what you need to protect yourself. You need to use an attorney, and I can help you with attorneys. Norb can help you with attorneys. But you have to do that. But here's what most folks want to avoid. A contract only comes into effect when all else has failed, right? This is when things go sideways. Then you start looking in the contract for remedies. And these remedies are typically legal remedies that are going to cost you money to execute. And so then go into this thing understanding exactly what you're doing. And Nord pointed out it was kind of funny. I laughed, but it's not funny at all if you're the guy on the other end and you essentially made a loan to someone and they're underperforming on that loan, however that might look. Here's a couple strategies that I do. First of all, my clients, if I help somebody like this, and I'm not a broker like Ground Consult or any of that kind of thing, I'm just a consultant that coaches guys on how to do things. And what I suggest is, first of all, require the guy to be a My Ground Force customer. And why am I doing it? It's not selfish in the sense that, I'm going to make some money out that, because one customer is not going to change the world. But what you have is you have down in the dirt performance metrics. You're going to know exactly what's going on in that business all the time. And if that guy wants you to carry back a large balloon payment, then he's going to have to deal with the fact that you're the bank and you're going to look over his shoulder. And
100%.
he's got to report to you. And in My Ground Force, we released today the Schedule A, the Schedule A1, the Schedule B, and your service and availability reports are all in My Ground Force now. So not only do you have the financial report, the schedules from FedEx, you also have financial reports, and you can set targets. And here's another technique that you can use, and I'll see what Norb thinks about this. I'll even ask or suggest to the seller that if you want me to tote that note, as we would say in the South, tote the note, then you got to sign. It's now called a SP30, not a BD30. You've got to sign a BD30 as the buyer. And I'm going to hold it like I'm holding the business in escrow, because essentially what you're saying is the investment that you've made in this business is the escrow payment to secure this balloon payment. That's effectively what you're saying. And so then I make them escrow the business. You give me a BD30, we're going to have these performance metrics. And if you begin to fail on these performance metrics, then you could trigger what amounts to the seller taking the business back, essentially foreclosure. Right. So, and look, nobody that sells wants to get back into business, but it's better to get back into business and protect your balloon payment and your equity than it is to then try to fight that out in the legal domain. It'll take 2 or 3 years to get that done. You will win, but what are you going to get? It could be that at the end, the guy doesn't have any money anyway. So, and then by that time, FedEx is taking that business away and giving it to someone else. And what you used to secure your business is gone. So I don't want to take up Norb's time here, but those are a couple techniques that I use or suggest to sellers to hedge a big private funding and turning themselves into a bank. I don't know what you think about that, Norb.
No, that's a fantastic idea. Those are juxtaposed to, do you want your tractors back? Do you want to be back in business? The answer to that is no. However, if there's a carryback that's reasonable and you end up getting the contract back or the tractors back, and I'm going to use a term that none of us like to use, but you can fire sale that and get your money back, right? So there are ways to exit that. The most important thing, though, is if you're going to carry back, obviously the most important thing is vetting the buyer, right? So I'm in a scenario now where I'm selling a contract, and the buyer, I've got several LOIs on the table, right? So I collect these LOIs. I just say the seller's looking to collect some LOIs, see who's interested, and then they want to review these. So the guy that's going to get it is an existing contractor who's just adding to his revenue top line, right? And so he's buying this small line haul operation, and he's run successfully as an existing contractor. That's the guy you want to risk with, because you know what his safety score is. You know that he's operating in a good manner right now. So you're taking a risk on something that's way more calculated than somebody that as a brand newbie. Now, the other thing to that is, let's talk about SBA for a second, because I want to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So SBA has what I call basically this treacherous, unrealistic model. So in other words, in today's day, they're looking for you as a minimum to put 10% down on a particular contract, and then at the going rates right now is about 11 to 11.25%. Now, if you start doing the math, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out the math that if you put 10% down at 11%, basically you're not making any money, right? You buy yourself a job, right? And so there's many complications in that to vet buyers that have enough money down, or there's a long-term investment goal where they're looking at a sort of a 10-year plan and they don't need the income from that particular company. And so there's a different strategy, and their strategy is to grow and to build equity through that growth, right? So this is an important aspect to it. The other thing with SBA that's important to know when you guys go into this is that SBA's legitimate, what we call add backs, are very limited. It's basically limited to depreciation and amortization and owner comp. So you get to take out some of these items that SBA will look from the previous year tax return. So if we're in a scenario right now, they're going to look at 2023 tax return, and they're going to boil it down to what your SDE is, or EBITDA, seller discretionary earnings. And they're going to do that by taking back depreciation, amortization, and owner comp. And anybody out of that, like say your wife that you're paying through that, or unnecessary people. All the other stuff like rent, even if you're not renting a place, telephone, travel, they will take meals out at time, but there's a bunch of things that I then talk to buyers to say, these are additional add backs that you're not going to require, right? Like you're not going to go buy your guys a bunch of cell phones. Basically, you're hiding this stuff in here. There's a bunch of things, contractors that will legitimately put some of their own fuel expense and stuff, their cars and whatnot. So you got to be able to decipher that. So in the SBA model, in order for them to value your business at a certain sales price, they're putting in those add backs, and they will emphatically not go over a 4 times multiple, usually around a 3.5 to 3.8 if what you're producing and showing in terms of documentation is spot on. Okay. Let me jump ahead just a little bit to that large spreadsheet, Ali, if you can go down maybe 1 or 2 slides. When we get there, I want to show you basically what we do. A couple more slides out. This one here, okay? Now it's tough to see, but this is something that we personally do in our company, and I do this. So I've got a running weekly P&L that is to the dollar, right? Like if I print out from QuickBooks or I have my accountant look at it, I can tell you every Tuesday night exactly where the company is. And the reason why I do this, and the reason why I've gone through arduous tasks to make sure this, and believe me, I can do on 3 million to 3.5 million company, I can do the payroll and do all this in less than 20 minutes. Like it's not rocket science. But what it does is it helps train my own brain. And I've shared this with a lot of contractors, and I'd be happy to share with you guys who want it, is to be able to track and benchmark, right? So there's this Tim has all of this in a data point in my ground force, right? The reason why I do this by hand as well is because this is the way I'm learning and showing in my own brain how this falls out. Now, the reason why I'm showing you guys is here's what SBA wants in documentation when you go to sell your business. They want 2 years tax returns, 2 years P&Ls and balance sheets, business profile where it documents things about tractors, drivers, what the runs look like, 2 years plus current year settlement statement and a summary of that, 2 years 1099, Schedule A, the contract, tractor points, things like that. Like there's a whole cadre of things, many of which you're going to be able to, let's say you were part of your My Ground Force customer, you're going to pull out, be able to print out. If you had a couple of years in there, you're going to be able to print it out just like that. Easy to do. So my point in stating this so emphatically is that I've met contractors over the years who I personally just appreciate these guys, what they've done. They're long-term contractors, but their P&Ls basically are one of two things. They either are on the back of a napkin, right? They know what they're doing. Trust me, these guys run great operations and they know what they're doing and they're making money, but they're old school and they've come from a background, or they're reliant on a bookkeeper that takes a long time to get back to them. This is the Achilles heel in selling, right? Is getting documentation from sellers and bookkeepers and accountants in a timely manner, right? Like if I was selling your business right now and you're like, or you were purchasing a business and a seller had to pony up and go, we're looking for 2024 Q3 financials, end of September. You'd be shocked how many contractors can't produce that in a timely manner. And we're now embarking on November 1st. It's not that it's their fault. They've never been in a scenario where they've had to produce that. So if you're thinking about selling, or in the same way, if you're buying, you're going to request this stuff and you want it in a timely manner. So backing up the bus, this manual process teaches me the ropes. The product, like what Tim has, gives you access to that data in the push of a button, right? You want to see the split and what your teams are doing. Like, for example, how much you're doing in line haul, how much you're doing in spots, what the fuel ad is, what the consumption of fuel is. All those data points you can bring to the table to any buyer and make that happen. Just popped in my mind a common question people are going to ask, and SBA is deadly on this, is carve-outs. So if you're selling your business, I'm going to take a part of the business and I'm going to sell that, but I'm going to keep this, which is very, very common. And some people think that, well, SBA won't touch that. We do tons of carve-out deals. No problem with SBA. What is the problem is being able to show them accurately how that separation takes place and where the data comes from. So one of my recent sales was a carve out where the guy kept the spots because he couldn't sell them. And he sold the line haul portion of it. Well, in programs like Tim's, that's a no-brainer. It's a push of a button. You know exactly what's coming out, how much is done annually for those spots, and how much is done for those line hauls. So when you take and add that to your tax return and your quarterly P&Ls, everything matches up. And what you're giving to SBA is this bulletproof analysis that says that here, this is what my business does, right? This is what my business does. And when you have that, you're 9/10 of the way of selling your business or purchasing a business. When you're looking at that, you have a right to demand those things, to look for those things.
One thing, Norm, that that folks who come to this FedEx world from the other business world, shall we say, I'll call it the real world. Sometimes we get lulled to sleep in this FedEx world to some degree. But look, sales price is always a function of risk. Anytime you're doing an M&A activity in any business, the valuation of that business is a function of risk. And the lower the risk, the higher the price. It's not complicated. And then so guys like Norb and I are trying to figure out where in that continuum does this particular business lie? What are the risks in this business? You know, and this is what Norb's been talking about. And what I hear from guys like Norb and other brokers all the time is, if you're a My Ground Force customer, like there's no risk in this business from being able to understand what's going on in the business. The business is essentially transparent because everything that's going on is available. Whatever question a lender might ask, you can show him on the screen. And so whenever you have this kind of powerful information available at the touch of a button, you engender confidence in folks who might be interested in buying your business and their lenders.
Exactly.
When, you don't have to go fight with your accountant and come back in 2 weeks. You can say, okay, well, here, let me just show you this. And it's all there, right? So we do weekly P&Ls and even at the tractor level. So keep in mind that running your business like a corporation will make your business worth more money. I've talked to many of these guys who practice checkbook accounting, and they make money, but they really have no idea what's going on in their business. And so when it comes time to try to value and sell that business, holy mackerel, you're kind of throwing some dirt in the air to figure things out. But when you have a tool that's comprehensive, that can give you profit and loss information every week, and you don't do anything, you just use a system and it's all there. In my case, I gave my accountant access to my ground force when I was a contractor. I'm like, here, man, here, it's all here. Half the work or 3/4 of the work has been done for you already. So keep in mind that when you acquire a tool like my ground force, you're adding value to your business, because performance information, particularly financial performance information, if it's easily available to potential buyers and their lenders, your business is worth more. Norb can have a conversation to say, hey, look how this business operates. What do you want to know? We know everything about it. You don't have to worry about that hidden risk that we didn't find in the assessment, because it's here. And then Norb can get you a higher price for your business because you have made the investment on your side. So anyway, I just wanted to inject that there's not really anywhere else you can go to get this kind of capability at the touch of a button that will engender that kind of confidence and lower the transparent risk in your business and make it worth more money.
And I predict there will come a day when there's a relationship between an SBA lender and a guy like me who will say, can I see the My Ground Force data on that company, right? Like that day will come, because I'm producing more and more. We're producing that kind of data that undergirds, what this company is actually doing, right? So this is a crucial part of where the future is going on this, 100%. Now, I just want to, take a look at our time here in 12 o'clock and do a hard stop there, unless you guys have any other questions. But the one other thing I want to just point out that's super important is this idea of, what are the key metrics on any line haul business that you sell. So after you've sold hundreds of these and looked at hundreds of P&Ls, you get to some common things, right? So things like labor, your payroll, there are some very consistent things of where that should be. Things like workers' comp and insurance. There's a commonality there. That's the second one. Then there's fuel. There's a commonality there. It shifts a little bit between whether you run teams or whether you run solo runs or whether you just run spots. It's going to shift a little bit, but you can see where those commonalities are there. And then repairs, or whether you have leases in there. So there's these very common things. I can basically look at a guy's spreadsheet and or the data points on that and determine how accurate you are on one of those things and where the problems might be, right? So those things are incredibly important when you're looking to sell. The last comment that I'll make about buying and selling, but I'll reference it particularly in relation to SBA. For SBA, the tax returns are the coup de grace. They are the foundation on which everything is benchmarked, right? So you can produce a 2023 tax return and then produce a Q3 2024 P&L. All they're looking for in the P&L is to make sure that the revenue is staying solid. They're looking at the tax return. So what that means is that if you were looking at selling in the future, you have to prepare what those tax returns look like. This is critical. If there's one thing that you hear me say today and you forget everything else I've said, is you have to strategically work the tax return and know what you're looking for. So after all those add backs, let's say if I was selling my own line haul company today and I did those add backs in there, I can tell you that I'm making right around the 24, 25% of revenue. right? Now, if I look at that and I go, how am I going to show that on a tax return and save money? Obviously, two crucial things. What's the depreciation on the tax return? What's the owner comp out of the tax return? And what's the amortization out of that tax return? And what other things will SBA allow me to take out of there? So what we do is we merge a tax return with a P&L and bring out this number that basically said, off of the tax return, here's the SDE or EBITDA, seller discretionary earnings, that states this is what this company makes. So I've done this with 3 contractors this last week. I will send them a mock-up of that, and then I'll say, take this to your accountant and tell them this line on this number and this percentage, that's what your target is, and reverse engineer it and then tell me where you're going to be, right? Because one of the problems, I've done this, and it happens all the time, where I'm dealing with guys' tax returns, and you cannot massage those numbers post. And what ends up happening is going, even if I sell your company for 4 times multiple, I can only get to 50% of revenue. Like, you know, nobody in their right mind, if you're running a stellar line haul contract, you're not going to sell it for 50% of revenue, not near that. But if your tax return and your P&Ls legitimately don't support a higher multiple, you're stuck. Right? So you got to think of this stuff in advance. So let me summarize to say this. Something like what Tim is doing, My Ground Force, is critical to building a track record of data that can support what your business does, both revenue and expense. And on the revenue side with FedEx, is super easy, right? Like you can see the revenue there, you can support it by a 1099. You just have to show year over year that you're tracking, right? The data points in terms of expenses like fuel and different things like that. Now you're building this war chest of data that supports what you want on the back end. Now, and then the same is true in the tax return portion of that, is that you want to prepare that in advance so that you get a better result when you're getting ready to go, right? So in the end, all these metrics are super, super important. And I would say for anybody, and as Tim mentioned, we're going to select somebody. Tim's going to do that. And we're happy to give you this free evaluation on your business and where you'd sit. But I would say 2 things, Tim, just to corroborate what you and I have talked about many, many times. People have to sign up. The investment on getting the data point is a no-brainer. You just have to do it. You have to explore that. You will learn more about your business digging into the data than any other single thing. And then you've got the backing that if that day comes to where you want to sell, you're handing over the data to the buyer, literally. Like your hand, you know, Tim's not going to cut that person off, go, now you got to start from scratch. You're like, let's hand this data over to the buyer that secures for them everything that you've built and spent lots of time and energy on money on to get you the best result, and pass on that data to somebody else. Make sense?
Yeah, you know, that's excellent information from Norb. He has taken you through a very detailed process on how he would walk you through buying or selling a business. And he hit a couple really big points. You know, what I see often is contractors don't pay attention to this they don't run their business as a corporation until all of a sudden they figure out they want to sell. And then they find out that by not running their business as a business for the past 5 years, the business worked less, because these things that Norb just talked about, tax returns and financials, don't line up, et cetera, et cetera. So this has been extremely, extremely valuable information. And, you know, we're looking, anybody have any more questions for Norb? I've handled a couple of questions along the way here, Norb. But
See that.
So one of the things, here's an interesting question. How does times earnings versus against using a 10-year T-bill for making the same profit? I'm not sure I completely understand the question, Shelby, but you know, this is I have this conversation with folks all the time. You know, you have to understand that this business, Norb started off, are you making an investment or are you getting a job? Right. And then if your answer is you're making an investment, then whatever money you put into this business, you should be assessing the likelihood that you could achieve the same return somewhere else. Because let me tell you something. If you're not a contractor and or you are a contractor, let's say it that way, it's a heck of a lot easier to make money by buying a T-bill than it is operating one of these businesses. So if you could get the same return without the same level of effort, you should be paying attention on how to do that, right? So every time you make investment in your business, you should be assessing that. I often coach guys like, you think you can get the same return by putting this $100,000 in your business that you could get somewhere else. You should be careful of that conversation. You should be having legitimate business conversations with yourself or with your counselors on how to do these things, right? I mean, this is how it's done in the real world. What I have tried to do in these webinar series is bring you how it's done in the real world. This contractor space is kind of the wild, wild west. People say they have, well, this is how I do it. And this is how, this is the way he does it. And everybody goes to Facebook to get the answers. And let me tell you something, in the real world, nobody goes to Facebook to get business answers. Nobody. Right. Okay. And so I'm not sure why we have fabricated this world of that we have in the FedEx networking space. There are real answers to these hard questions, and there are only a couple of ways to run this business successfully. And you just heard Norb tell you how to do it in detail. So does anybody else have any questions for Norb? I really appreciate his time today. He has been the fountain of knowledge I expected him to be.
And I'd be happy to answer questions after. Just shoot me a line. Just if you have any general question, whatever. I'm in this space to help guys. I don't sell for the money as much as I just love being in the space. And even if you have a question just about anything in regards to your line haul opportunity, I'd be happy to answer that. And just maybe conclude with this, Tim, is that this is a great space to be in. It's a lot of work, and it's hard work, and it's effort for sure. But the more you can invest in good data and good practices in your business, you're going to be way more successful. No question about it. Particularly if you're growing your business, right?
The return on that is so many people are like, well, I don't want to spend the money on this. I don't want to spend the money on that. And, they're saving pennies and losing dollars. And, data is the most important business asset right now. If you talk to any big business, they will say it's all about our data. And then what do we do with that data? We take that data and we process it. We add value to it. It becomes decision information. And now you have legit, repeatable decision information to help you know what's going on in your business and how to make those adjustments. If you were going to go to a doctor and you were having blood pressure issues, he's going to say, look, I want you to bring me a chart. I want you to take your blood pressure at 10, 2, and 4 every day for the next 30 days. And then you're going to go back and he's going to look at that data and he's going to tell you what's going on in your body. It's the same thing in your business. And we have the luxury in the FedEx world of getting a detailed statement every week from our customer on what they're paying us and why they're paying that amount. And then you have tools like My Ground Force that can help analyze that, find what they didn't pay you. This is important too. But you don't have any collections requirements, right? You get paid all your money every week. This is not done anywhere else that I know of in the business world. And so we get lulled to sleep because the money's coming in all the time and the right things don't get done. So you just heard Norb explain to you what will happen to your bank account when you try to sell your business or you try to buy a business. If you're not doing it the right way, we talk about the right way a lot. You heard about the right way today. Then you're gonna be penalized for that. Data is king, and repeatable data is worth more. Transparency is worth an extra multiple when you start trying to sell your business, right? So keep that in mind. Does anybody else have a question for Norb before we in this week's webinar. Okay. Well, we had a lot of conversation there, Norb. I really appreciate your time. The presentation was outstanding. As usual, we have recorded this. We'll make it available on the website tomorrow, along with the slides. So you'll have access to this information tomorrow. If you're interested in some of the things that Norb referred to, our WorthX, that's what we call it, our acquisition analysis tool, that is available. Or we can get you a demo for My Ground Force. I know we have a lot of My Ground Force customers here. So next week, we're going to have a conversation with Kevin Brunner. Kevin Brunner is an expert on how to get you out of this business tax-free. And we're going to talk to him in detail. We're going to do exactly with him what we did this week with Norb. He works closely with Norb. These guys are experts on how to get you into the business, as we just heard, and how to get you out of the business if you decide you've hit your financial targets and it's time to move on. So tune in next week at 2 p.m. again on Tuesday afternoon, and we will talk to Kevin Brunner. Now, we've been saying now all fall that we're going to allow the audience to submit suggestions on what you might want to hear from us on our week after next, our 8th episode in the fall series. And so far, we've heard exactly nothing. No one's had any suggestions. So I'm preparing to do some things on that webinar a couple weeks from today. If you do have a suggestion, please feel free to go ahead and submit it, and we will take that into consideration. Once again, really appreciate Norb making his time available and the prep work that we have to do for these webinars. The folks who present like Norb, there's a lot of work that goes into this. They don't just show up. We try to have a very high standard for the quality of the data that we bring to you, and then you can completely trust the information that you hear here. This is not Facebook. This is a worthwhile, very trustworthy source of information, and you saw that again today from one of the most honest men in America, Norb Kohler. So again, appreciate you guys attending today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week as we continue to focus on how to be profitable in the TSP business at FedEx. You guys have a good week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.